The girl turned her face directly toward him and said he was alive and that he was watching. His mother shushed her. "No one is watching. No one has been watching for a long time." And he lay on the cold floor and saw the crack in the ceiling. He saw the dust in the strip of light. He saw everything. And he already understood. No one must know about this. Daniel opens his eyes and sees 3 faces: a woman with a silver bandage, a bearded man in a leather apron, a girl of about 10 clinging to the woman's skirt, and none of them is looking him in the face. The woman tilts her head back toward the ceiling. The man stares intently at the wall. The girl traces patterns in the air with her fingers. The woman's eyes are hidden by the bandage. The man's eyes are covered by a white, cloudy film. The girl's eyes are the same, milky, empty. They are all blind. And then, in the left corner of his vision, a white strip of text flashes. Subject: Han Yirim. Anxiety 74%. Heart rate 112. Do not make sudden movements. The strip flashes and fades. Daniel stops breathing. He sees the color of the bandage. He sees a crack in the ceiling. He sees dust in the strip of light coming from the doorway. And he realizes 2 things at once. First, he really can see. Second, no one can know about this. He closes his eyes. The woman leans closer. She listens for his breath. She tries to tell by the sound whether he's alive. Daniel exhales slowly and evenly. The woman recoils. She tells the man that the guest is breathing. Daniel opens his eyelids just enough to see through his lashes. The room is cramped. The ceiling is low. The walls have not a single window. Instead of windows, there are oval niches in the walls, each the size of a palm. A quiet hum comes from one, a faint clicking from another. He doesn't understand what it is, but he sees everything. Thick braided ropes stretch along the walls at waist level. The man slides his fingers along the rope toward the door without looking away for a second. The girl is holding on to another one. Lower down. A child's. Daniel sits down. His head is buzzing. His body feels foreign. His arms are thinner than he remembers. On his right palm is an old scar he never had. He looks at his feet. Rough leather boots with thick soles. On the left, a raised, ribbed mark on the toe. He doesn't know why it's there. A woman holds out a mug to him. Definitely to him, without looking, by the sound of his breathing. Daniel takes the mug with both hands and drinks. The water is warm with a taste of iron. He wheezes a thank you in a stranger's voice. The woman nods. She says she found him on the street near the 3rd guide rail, that he was lying unconscious, that she thought he was dead but felt a pulse in his neck. Daniel looks at her through half-closed eyelids. Around 30, dark hair in a bun. Her hands are slender but sinewy, calluses on her fingers. The bandage isn't an ornament. A thick silver fabric with an embroidered pattern completely covers her eyes. The pattern signifies something important. He doesn't know what yet. The woman asks his name. Daniel gives his name. She tries it out. She says her name is Han Yerim. The girl is her daughter, Sosora. The man is her neighbor, Park Chun-ho. They live in the lower district of Seoul-na, Hallam. Daniel nods. He realizes she can't see his nod. He says he understands and is grateful. Yerim asks where he's from, and right then he freezes. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know when it is. He doesn't know what happened to the world. He says he doesn't remember, that his head is splitting and his memory is muddled. Yerim takes it calmly. She says that this happens after a fall and that he can stay the night. Sora tugs at her mother's sleeve. She whispers if she can touch the guest's hand. Yerim allows it. Sora approaches. She touches his fingers.
Runs her fingertips over his knuckles, over his nails, over the lines of his palm.
She reads his hand like a page in a book. She says his hands aren't those of a laborer, that his skin is too smooth, that he's probably a storyteller or a bookkeeper. Yoram snorts. He says Sora thinks too much for her age. Daniel almost smiles, but inside he feels cold. He sits in a windowless room in a world of the blind and sees every crack in the ceiling, and every second of this sight is a danger he cannot yet measure. Night falls unnoticed, not by the light, there's almost none in the house, by sound. The city beyond the walls changes its voice. The daytime hum of the market gives way to a rhythmic ringing. Bells. Dozens. Hundreds. They ring at different pitches and in different rhythms. Daniel lies on a straw mattress and listens. Every bell means something. He doesn't know what yet, but he hears a system, a pattern, a regularity. This is a city that speaks to itself in the language of sound.
He looks at the ceiling and sees the shadows from the oil lamp that Yoram lit out of habit. The lamp isn't for light. It hums. A low, steady sound fills the room and echoes off the walls. And Daniel understands. The lamp is acoustic. It doesn't provide light. It fills the space with sound. By the echo of the sound, a blind person determines the size of the room and where the furniture stands. Daniel turns and looks at Yoram's workbench. Thin metal rods, tuning forks of various sizes, coils of wire, and at the edge of the table, an object that makes him freeze. Sora's mug. Next to it, a dried-up puddle of milk, and a Braille storybook with a soggy cover. He remembers. When Yoram brought him to the workshop, Sora had tried to pour herself some milk. She missed. She spilled it on the table and the book. She didn't cry. She just stood up and went to change. But Daniel saw it. He saw her chin trembling, how she pressed her lips together, how her little fingers clung to her wet dress. Daniel sits down. The house is asleep. Yoram and Sora are behind the thin wall. He hears the girl's steady breathing. He stands up, quietly. He walks over to the table and takes the luthier's knife. He finds a piece of softwood on the shelf. He sits back down and cuts. He works for 4 hours. The knife is awkward. The wood crumbles in one spot and resists in another. But his fingers remember. They remember thousands of prototypes from a past life. Cardboard mock-ups, styrofoam molds, silicone button covers. He's spent his whole life making things for those who cannot see. And now he's making another one. A ring. A simple wooden ring with a small protrusion, a tab the size of a fingernail. When the first bells ring for the morning shift, the ring is ready. Daniel sands it down with coarse cloth. He tries it on his little finger. It's just right for a child's index finger. In the morning, Sora walks into the kitchen. She shuffles her feet, counts her steps. 12 from the door to the table. She sits down, reaches for a mug. Daniel stands beside her, slips the ring onto her index finger, the tab facing out.
Sora freezes. She twirls the ring. She touches the little tongue. She asks what it is. Daniel says quietly that it's a whisker, like a cat's. He says that when she reaches for the mug, she has to stick her finger out. The little tongue will touch the rim a split second before her hand knocks the mug over. Sora is silent for 3 seconds. Then she reaches for the mug. Her finger and the little tongue move forward. They touch the rim. Sora wraps her hand around the mug. She lifts it. Doesn't spill a drop. She puts it back down. Lifts it again. Puts it down. She lifts it. She turns toward the door. Yoram is standing in the doorway. Daniel sees her face. He sees how she catches every sound, the clink of the mug against the table, silence instead of a splash. Clink. Silence. Clink. Silence.
Sora says in a steady, grown-up voice that Mom, she can drink tea by herself. Yoram doesn't answer. She sinks to the floor very slowly. She sits right in the doorway. She covers her face with her hands. Her shoulders shake. Sora sets the mug down and turns her head toward Daniel. She whispers that Mom is crying and asks if that's good or bad. Daniel says it's good. He looks at Yoram, at Sora, at the small wooden ring on the child's finger, and he realizes one thing. He hasn't stumbled into a fairy tale. He hasn't stumbled into an adventure. He's stumbled into the work he's been doing his whole life. Only now, lives depend on it. For 3 days, Daniel didn't leave the house. He was learning. Not about the world. He was learning about the world too. But first and foremost, he was learning to be blind. It turned out to be unbearably difficult. His body betrayed him every second. His hand reached out on its own toward an object he could see. His head turned toward movement. His eyes followed people. Any one of these reflexes could kill him. Daniel started with the basics. He closed his eyes and walked around the workshop. He counted his steps. He memorized distances. 12 steps from the mattress to the door. 8 steps from the door to the table. 3 steps from the table to the tool shelf. He bumped into a stool. He hit his hip against the workbench. He knocked over the stand with the tuning forks. The ringing filled the room. Yoram called from the kitchen to ask if everything was all right. Daniel said he'd tripped. She replied that he was walking like someone who'd just lost his sight for the first time. Daniel froze. A cold sweat broke out on him. Yoram paused. Then she said it sometimes happens after a hard blow to the head, that his coordination would return in a week. Daniel exhaled, but he realized that Yoram was listening to him much more closely than he'd thought. She was a sound technician. Her job was to pick up on the slightest deviations in sound, and to her, Daniel was just another instrument that sounded off. On the second day, he began learning to use a cane. In the corner of the workshop stood 3 canes of different lengths. Yoram gave him the middle one. She showed him how to hold it, how to tap in front of him in an arc, how to count the echoes off the walls. Daniel was doing everything right. Too right. Yoram noticed. She said he was learning quickly for a man with no memory. Daniel replied that the body remembers more than the mind. Yoram said nothing, but her fingers on the tuning fork froze for a split second. Daniel saw it. She suspected something. She didn't know what yet, but she suspected. On the third day, Daniel began to really explore the house. He walked around with his eyes open while Yoram was at work and Sora was at school.
The house had 2 stories. The first floor was a workshop and a kitchen. The second floor had bedrooms.
The walls were thick, made of some kind of porous stone. Each wall was covered with fine grooves.
Daniel ran his fingers over them. It was a map. A tactile map of the house right on the wall. Here, a raised area meant a door. Here, a groove meant a window. Although no, there were no windows. The groove marked an acoustic niche. Daniel walked around the entire house and mapped it out in his head. A habit. 7 years of work had taught him to memorize a space in 5 minutes. This skill could now save his life. The kitchen struck him the most. Everything was identifiable by touch. Jars with lids of different textures. Smooth meant salt. Ribbed meant flour. Rough meant pepper. Spoons and knives with marks on their handles. 1 notch meant a soup spoon. 2 notches meant a small spoon. 3 notches meant a bread knife. The system was clever, but imperfect. Daniel saw problems a blind person couldn't notice. The shelf with the jars stood right over the edge of the table.
Any careless movement could knock a jar onto the floor. The knives lay with their blades pointing in different directions. The cutting board slid across the wet countertop. Each of these little things was a daily risk for Urim and Sora. Daniel stood in the middle of the kitchen and watched. His professional mind was already at work. He already saw solutions. The shelf needed to be moved a hand's width away from the edge. The knives should be placed in a wooden rack with slits, blades down. The board needed a rubber mat. The jars should be arranged not by lid type, but by frequency of use. The most necessary ones at elbow level, the rarely used ones on top. But he couldn't do it all at once. He couldn't change everything in a single day. A blind apprentice with no memory can't remodel someone else's kitchen in 3 days. That would raise questions. Daniel started small. He moved the cutting board. He placed a wet rag under it so it wouldn't slip. Urim noticed it that evening. She asked who had moved the board. Daniel said he'd been cooking for himself and the board had slipped. That he'd put the rag there so it wouldn't fall. Urim tried it. The board stood perfectly still. She didn't say anything, but Daniel saw her eyebrows rise for a split second. On the 4th day, he left the house for the first time. Urim gave him a cane and tied a thin string to his wrist. She tied the other end of the string to her belt. She said she would lead him to the market, that he had to memorize the route, that counting steps was useless because the streets were crooked. Instead, he had to memorize the sounds. Here is the blacksmith's shop, the sound of a hammer. Here is the bakery, the sizzling of dough. Here is the turn. The bell on the pole rings 4 times. Daniel walked with his eyes closed. The cane tapped in front of him. The cord on his wrist tightened when Urim turned. He counted the turns. He listened to the bells. He memorized the smells. But from time to time, he opened his eyes for a second. And he saw. The streets of Seoul on the hills were narrow and winding. The houses stood close together, walls without windows, without decorations, without signs. Instead of signs, there were embossed symbols on the walls. Daniel didn't know their meaning. Rope guides ran along every street. At intersections stood posts with bells. The pavement was grooved. Different stone textures indicated different things. Smooth slabs meant the sidewalk. Ribbed ones meant the edge of the road. Sharp notches meant steps ahead. Daniel recognized the principles. He had with this his whole life. Tactile indicators, audible beacons, guidelines. Everything he designed on a computer screen had been built here in stone and metal. Only the scale was different. Not a subway station, an entire city.
The market deafened him with sound. The voices of vendors, the clatter of coins on the counters, the jingle of small bells on shoppers' belts.
Every person wore a bell. By the sound, one could determine the distance to the nearest neighbor. Daniel opened his eyes for a moment. A crowd. Dozens of people. All with canes or guide cords. All with blindfolds or with wide, milky eyes. Their faces were surprisingly expressive. Those blind from birth did not know how to hide their emotions. Every thought, every feeling was reflected on their faces instantly and completely. The man selling coins was irritated. His lips twisted and his forehead creased. The woman choosing fabric was happy. She was smiling so widely that all her teeth were visible. The child next to her was frightened by something, eyes wide open, mouth clenched. Daniel read these people like open books. Every face was transparent. No masks, no pretense, no polite smiles hiding malice. Complete, absolute emotional nakedness. And Daniel realized one more thing about his vision. He didn't just see light and color. He saw the truth. Every second. On every face. And this truth was both a gift and a curse at the same time. Yoram stopped at the counter with the metal plates. Books. They were books. Thin copper plates covered in braille dots. Yoram ran her fingers over one of them. She read the title. She asked the price. The vendor named a number. Yoram frowned. Daniel saw her face. She was upset. Too expensive. She put the plate back. It was a collection of fairy tales. New. To replace the ones Sora had spilled milk on. Daniel remembered the counter and the vendor. On the way back, he walked behind Yoram and thought. He needed a job. He needed money. He needed a place in this world. And he couldn't just sit around in Yoram's house eating her food. That evening, he told Yoram he wanted to be useful, that he didn't remember who he was, but his hands remembered how to work, that he could fix things. Yoram was silent for a moment. Then she said she needed an apprentice, that the previous one had left 2 months ago, that the work was hard and paid little. Daniel said he didn't need pay. Just food and a roof over his head. Yoram handed him a tuning fork. She told him to strike it. Daniel struck the tuning fork against the edge of the table. A clear sound filled the room. Yoram listened. Then she said the strike was good. Steady. Confident. That his hand didn't shake. She said she'd take him on a trial basis. 1 week. If he could handle it, he'd stay. Daniel nodded. He remembered that she couldn't see. He said he agreed. Sora sat in the corner and listened. She twirled the ring on her finger. She hadn't taken it off for a minute since that morning. She said Uncle Daniel could stay because he'd done something useful. Yoram said it was time for Sora to go to bed. Sora walked toward the stairs. Halfway there, she turned around. She said that Uncle Daniel had turned his head again while Mom was speaking, that she'd heard a movement. But usually, people turn their heads toward a sound, but he turns his head toward a person. Silence. Yoram said calmly that Sora was making things up, that she needed to sleep. Sora went upstairs. Daniel stood in the middle of the workshop and didn't move. His heart was pounding. A 10-year-old girl had noticed what he had been hiding for 3 days. He turns his head not toward a sound, but toward a face. Because he sees a face. And Sora, who had never seen a single face in her life, somehow heard the difference. Yoram was making acoustic lamps. Daniel watched her work for 5 days before he understood exactly how.
The lamp consisted of a metal casing the size of a fist. Inside was a set of thin plates tuned to specific frequencies. When the lamp was turned on, the plates began to vibrate. The sound was almost inaudible to an unaccustomed ear, a quiet, steady hum on the edge of perception. But this sound bounced off the walls, ceiling, floor, and furniture, and returned.
A blind person, accustomed to living in a world of echoes, could use these reflections to construct a mental map of the room, where the wall was, where the door was, where the table was. The lamp was the eyes of this world, and Yoram was the one who tuned those eyes. The work was precision work. Each plate had to vibrate at the exact frequency. Too low, and the sound would be lost in the street noise. Too high, and it would cause pain. Yoram tuned the plates with tuning forks. She struck the tuning fork, pressed it against the plate, and listened. Then she bent the plate by a fraction of a millimeter with tiny tweezers, and listened again. Daniel realized that this was the same work he had in his past life. Only there, he had been tuning interfaces, moving a button by 2 pixels, adjusted the contrast by 3%, removed an unnecessary element, added a hint. The difference between a good interface and a bad one lay in the details the user doesn't notice. Here it was the same. The difference between a good lamp and a bad one lay in the overtones the listener isn't aware of, but feels. On the 6th day, Yoram gave him his first assignment. She placed a broken lamp in front of him. The casing was intact, but one of the plates had cracked. He had to cut out a new one and adjust it. Daniel picked up the blank, a thin strip of metal. He could see its shape. He could see the microscopic scratches from the tool on the old plate. He could see the angle of the bend. A blind master would have done this by touch, for hours. Daniel could have done it in 20 minutes. But he didn't. He worked for 2 hours, deliberately slowly, deliberately clumsily. He dropped the pliers. He asked Yoram to check the thickness. He asked which tuning fork to use, even though he'd already seen the right one on the shelf. Yoram stood nearby and listened. When he finished, she took the plate. She placed it in the lamp. She turned it on. She listened for 10 seconds. Then she turned it off and turned to him. She said the record was tuned a half step higher than it should be. Daniel said he'd try again. Yoram shook her head. She said that a half step higher wasn't a mistake. It was an intentional shift. That lamps are tuned that way for large rooms where the sound needs to travel longer to reach the walls. That this lamp was for a small room, but he had tuned it for a hall. She asked how he knew the difference between settings for different rooms if he didn't remember his profession. Daniel froze. He hadn't thought about it. His brain had automatically calculated the room's parameters and adjusted the settings. Only he'd calculated the room for the workshop where they were standing, and the lamp was meant for the customer's small room. He said he'd probably just guessed. Yoram didn't reply. Daniel readjusted the plate, this time correctly. Yoram checked it. She nodded. She said it wasn't bad for a first try, but Daniel saw her face. She wasn't satisfied. She was wary. That night he lay awake thinking every skill he had was a trap. The better he worked, the more questions he raised. A blind apprentice with no memory couldn't adjust a lamp with the precision of a master. He couldn't walk through an unfamiliar house without bumping into the furniture. He couldn't turn his head precisely toward the face of the person he was talking to. He had to make mistakes. A lot. Plausibly. And yet work well enough so that Yoram wouldn't fire him. A balance between truth and lies, between usefulness and invisibility.
The first client arrived in the morning, an old man named So-Yun-Ho, a cartographer. He made tactile maps of neighborhoods, relief panels made of fired clay on which streets, houses, guide ropes, and danger zones were marked with raised lines. So-Yun-Ho came with a cane. His cane was old, cracked, wrapped in leather in 3 places. He sat down on a stool and told Yoram that he hadn't come for a lamp,
that he needed a new cane, that the old one was falling apart, and there was a 2-month wait at the city workshop. Yoram said she didn't make canes, that it was a carpenter's job. So Yun-Ho sighed and began to get up. Daniel looked at the old man. The interface in his field of vision flashed. Subject: So-Yun-Ho. Condition: fatigue. Pain syndrome: right hand. Daniel looked at the old man's hand. The right hand was weaker than the left. The fingers wouldn't straighten all the way. The old man had suffered a stroke or something similar. A standard cane is held in the center of the palm. For a hand with limited finger mobility, that's torture. A different grip is needed, a different balance, a different weight. Daniel said he could try. Yoram turned to him. So Yun-Ho paused. Daniel said there was wood and tools in the workshop, that all he needed was to feel the old cane and Master So's hand. Yoram wanted to object, but So Yun-Ho had already held out the cane and his hand. Daniel took both. He felt the cane slowly and carefully, even though he had already seen everything: the length, the thickness, the wear and tear, the center of gravity. Then he took the old man's hand. He ran his fingers over the palm, over the fingers, over the joints. He felt a limitation in the little finger and ring finger. The index and middle fingers worked normally. The thumb was fine. Daniel closed his eyes and began to think. Not as a master of this world, as a designer from the past. The task: a cane for the right hand with limited mobility in the 4th and 5th fingers. The grip must rely on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd fingers. Shift the balance forward by 4 grams to compensate for the weak grip. The handle should be oval, not round, with a notch for the thumb, and with a slight curve in the upper third so the wrist doesn't get tired. He worked all day. Yoram came over several times and listened. The tapping of the knife, the rustling of sandpaper, the creak of wood. Daniel tried to work slowly, but lost track of time. His hands knew what to do. By evening, the cane was ready. It was 2 fingers shorter than standard. The handle was oval with a smooth indentation. The weight was shifted forward just enough so that his hand didn't strain, but the cane didn't tip forward. Daniel called for Yoram. He asked her to invite Master So the next morning. Yoram took the cane and felt it, for a long time, in silence. She ran her fingers along the handle, along the indentation, along the curve. Then she said quietly that this was not the work of an apprentice, that it was the work of a master with 10 years of experience. Daniel said he was lucky. Yoram didn't answer. In the morning, So Yun-Ho arrived. He took the new cane. He gripped the handle with his right hand. His fingers fit into the indentations perfectly. He didn't need to bend his pinky or ring finger. The grip rested on 3 fingers and was firm. The old man took a step, another, a third. He walked across the workshop from the door to the wall and back. Then he stopped. His face looked strange. Daniel read surprise on it, then disbelief, then something resembling fear, and then So Yun-Ho smiled.
He smiled the way people smile who have forgotten that it's possible. He said his right hand didn't hurt. For the first time in 3 years, his hand didn't hurt when he held the cane. He asked how much it cost. Yoram named the price for the materials, so Yun-ho paid triple that amount. He said he would tell everyone he met about the workshop, and he left. His footsteps on the pavement sounded different, more confident, more steady. Urim stood in the doorway and listened to those footsteps. Then she turned to Daniel. She said she didn't know who he was, that she didn't know where he was from, but that a man who makes such things could live in her house for as long as he needed. A month passed. Daniel learned to live a double life. By day, he was an apprentice, clumsy, slow,
asking a lot of questions. By night, he was who he really was, a designer. Every night after the house had fallen asleep, Daniel sat down at his workbench and made things. Small things, imperceptible things. A wooden knife block with slots. Towel hooks at a height so Sora could reach them without a stool. Rubber corner pads for the table made from an old piece of leather. A doorknob with a notch that indicated which way to pull. Every morning, Yoram found something new in the house. She felt it. She tried it. She said nothing. Once she asked who had put the knife block there. Daniel said it was him, that he hadn't been able to sleep at night and had decided to practice carving. Yoram took a knife from the holder. She put it back. The blade slid into the slot softly and precisely. Yoram said nothing. But that evening, she placed a plate with extra meat in front of Daniel. Sora noticed. She said that Uncle Daniel was getting more meat than she was. Yoram replied that he worked harder. Sora was indignant. Yoram smiled. Daniel saw that smile. Warm, quiet. The first genuine smile he'd seen on her face in a month. The workshop started getting orders, not for lamps, for other things. Se-Yun-ho told the neighbors about the cane. The neighbors told their neighbors. 2 weeks later, a woman came to the workshop asking to have a kitchen timer repaired. Daniel took the timer and saw the problem. The mechanism was working fine, but the start button was too stiff for fingers weakened by arthritis. He replaced the spring with a softer one and added a lever to increase the leverage. The woman left happy. 3 days later, a man came in with a musical instrument, something resembling a lute. He said he couldn't find the 4th string by touch, that the strings were too close together. Daniel looked at the instrument. 4 strings stretched 8 millimeters apart. For a sighted person, this is normal. For a blind musician with thick fingers, it's torture.
Daniel remade the neck joint. He spread the strings apart. Between the 2nd and 3rd, he placed a small tactile bump, a guide. The musician picked up the instrument. He ran his fingers along the neck. He found the bump. From there, he found the right string. He played a chord, a clean, even chord. The old man froze. Then he played another one, and another. His blind eyes were wet. He played for 10 minutes without stopping. Yoram stood in the corner of the workshop and listened. When the musician left, she approached Daniel. She stood close. He could smell her hair, metal and oil from working on lamps. She said quietly that she didn't understand, that he made things no one else in town made, that each of his creations solved a problem people didn't even know they had. Daniel said he just listened, that people told him themselves what they needed. They just didn't know it can be fixed. Yoram stood motionless. Then she said one word. Tuning fork.
Daniel didn't understand.
Yoram explained. She said that every person has a tuning fork, a sound by which you can determine who they are. A voice, a gait, breath, heartbeat. She said that Daniel's tuning fork sounded wrong, like an instrument tuned for another world. Daniel didn't answer. Yoram said she didn't know what he was hiding, but that she wouldn't ask, because a person who does such things for other people can't be dangerous. She went upstairs. Daniel stood in the empty workshop. His hands were shaking. She knew. She didn't know exactly what, but she knew he was different. And she decided not to ask. A week later, Yoram officially announced him as an apprentice before the Tuners Guild. This meant he was now part of the system. He had a name in the registry, an occupation, a place of residence. He was no longer a vagabond with no past. He had become a craftsman. This provided protection. The guild was responsible for its own, but it also made him visible. His name was now on record.
That same month, Daniel got serious about the workshop. He reorganized Yoram's workspace, not all at once, gradually, one small change every day. He moved the shelf with the blanks closer to the workbench. He hung the tools on the wall in order of frequency of use, the most necessary ones at shoulder height, the less frequently used ones higher up. He made a stand for the tuning forks where each one stood in its own slot marked with raised notches. Yoram no longer wasted time searching for the right tuning fork among 20 similar ones. She reached out and immediately found the one she needed. The time it took to tune a single lamp was cut by a quarter. Yoram noticed. Of course she noticed. She asked him one evening why he had arranged the tuning forks that way. Daniel replied that it was by pitch. Low ones on the left, high ones on the right, like piano keys. Yoram was silent for a moment. Then she said she would never have thought to arrange them that way.
That she'd always arranged things by size, but by pitch was more convenient. She said he thought differently, not like others. Daniel said that was because he didn't remember how others thought. Yoram smiled. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, quiet and brief, but genuine. By the end of the month, Daniel decided to make a gift for Yoram. She worked with tuning forks 10 hours a day. The main tuning fork, the one she used to check the final tuning of the lamp, was old. Daniel saw a micro crack in it that Yoram could neither see nor hear. The crack was tiny, but it shifted the frequency by a barely noticeable amount. Every lamp Yoram had tuned over the past few months was just a little off. Not enough for customers to complain, but enough for Yoram to intuitively feel that something was wrong and double-checked every job 3 times. She didn't know why she felt the lamps had gotten worse. She thought she was getting old, that her hearing was failing.
Daniel saw it on her face every evening. Fatigue, self-doubt.
He took a scrap of metal from the workshop's supplies. He wasn't a blacksmith, but he knew the shape. Over 3 nights, he forged a new tuning fork. Rough, clumsy, with zero aesthetic appeal, but with the correct frequency. He tested it with his interface. A bar in his field of view showed the oscillation frequency accurate to the 100th. In the morning, he placed the tuning fork on Yoram's table next to the old one. Yoram came in. She picked up the old tuning fork. She struck it. She listened. She picked up the new one. She struck it. She listened. She struck it again. And again. She stood there with both tuning forks in her hands for a very long time. Then she sat down. Slowly. She said almost in a whisper that the old tuning fork was out of tune, that it had been out of tune all this time and she hadn't heard it,
that she had checked every lamp 3 times and didn't understand what was wrong.
She thought she was losing her hearing. For 3 months, she thought she was losing her hearing. Daniel was silent. Yoram clenched the new tuning fork in her palm. She asked where he had gotten it. Daniel said he made it. Yoram said that was impossible, that tuning forks are made only by master blacksmiths of the guild, that it takes 5 years to learn, that a tuner's apprentice couldn't forge a tuning fork with such precision. Daniel said he'd been lucky. Yoram stood up. She walked over to him. She stood so close that he could hear her breathing. She said very quietly that she wouldn't ask where or how anymore, that she didn't care, that this tuning fork was more accurate than any she had held in 15 years of work, 12% more accurate. She could hear it, and that was enough. The rumor spread like the sound of a bell. Ripples spread from Yoram's workshop throughout the lower quarter, an apprentice who makes strange things, canes that don't rub your palm raw,
kitchen utensils that stop burning you, children's toys that won't hurt a child. Every item was made for one specific person, not for everyone, for one. It was unusual. The city workshops made standard items, a walking stick of one size, a mug of one shape, a spoon of one weight. All the same because no one sees the difference. But there was a difference. Daniel saw it, and the people who received his items felt it too. By the 3rd month, the wait list for the workshop had stretched to 2 weeks. Yoram was both proud and anxious. Proud because, for the first time in years, the workshop was bringing in real income. Anxious because too much attention was dangerous. In the city of the blind, reputation was the only currency. A good reputation offered protection. A reputation that was too conspicuous attracted those from whom protection was of no use. Daniel didn't know this yet. He found out on the day So Young Ho came to the workshop with news. The old cartographer sat down on his usual stool. He stroked the cane Daniel had made for him 2 months earlier and said that seekers were roaming the lower quarter. Daniel didn't know who they were. Yoram knew. Daniel saw her face change instantly. The smile vanished. Her lips tightened. The fingers on the tuning fork turned white. So Yun Ho explained. The Seekers are people of the Order of Silence, blind hunters with dogs. They search for anomalies, people who move differently, speak differently, live differently. 30 years ago, after the White Dawn, there were survivors with sight. Not many. The Order found them all. The Order ensured the safety of everyone else. That's what the old man said. His voice was even, neutral, like a man recounting a well-known fact. Daniel listened and felt a chill rise from his stomach to his throat. Ensured safety. He understood what that meant. So Yun Ho continued. He said the Seekers had come on a tip. Someone had reported that there was a man in the lower quarter who didn't stumble on the stairs. Daniel stopped breathing. The stairs. The damned stairs. He remembered. A week ago he was walking home from the market and forgot to close his eyes on the stairs between the 2nd and 3rd floors. He just ran down the steps, fast, confidently, without counting, without tapping his cane on every step. Someone was standing nearby. Someone heard his footsteps. Smooth, quick steps down the stairs without a single stumble. A blind man doesn't walk like that. Never. Yoram let go of So Yun Ho. When the door closed, she turned to Daniel. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there and listened to his breathing.
Daniel knew his breathing betrayed his fear. Yoram knew it too. She said he needed to be more careful. Just that. No questions, no accusations, just a warning. Daniel nodded. Then he said aloud that he would be more careful. Yoram went upstairs to Sora.
Daniel stood alone in the workshop. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it beating in his own ears. The interface in his field of vision flashed. Adrenaline level critical. Heart rate 148. Recommendation: calm down. He sat down on the floor. He closed his eyes. He counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. By the 20th breath, his hands stopped shaking. By the 40th, his heart slowed. By the 60th, he opened his eyes and began to think. The searchers are looking for an anomaly, a man who doesn't stumble. They have dogs trained to sniff out the scent of adrenaline. People who move too confidently in unfamiliar places give by their body chemistry. The adrenaline of fear is different from the adrenaline of confidence. Dogs can sense the difference. A blind man on an unfamiliar staircase is afraid. His body releases fear hormones. A sighted person on the same staircase isn't afraid. His body is calm, and the dog can sense it. Daniel had to learn to be afraid. To be truly afraid. Every time he goes outside. Every time he walks up the stairs. Every time he enters an unfamiliar room. His body must react like the body of a sighted person, with fear, with tension, with caution. It was the opposite of what he was used to. All his life he had learned to take away other people's fear, to make the world less frightening, and now he had to teach himself to fear the world he could see clearly. From that day on, Daniel began to train. Every morning before going out, he closed his eyes. Not just closed them, he tied a cloth over them, tightly, and walked around the house, through the workshop, up the stairs to the second floor, without sight, for real. He bumped into walls, dropped things, missed the steps, and his body began to remember fear. After a week of such training, his gait on the street changed. He walked more slowly, more uncertainly. His cane tapped the ground more often. His body was tense. The chemistry was right. Another week later, at the market, a woman accidentally nudged him in the side with her elbow, and he actually flinched. Not because he was pretending, because in the darkness behind the blindfold, the world had become truly unpredictable. Sora watched him. She couldn't see, of course. She was listening. And one evening she said that Uncle Daniel had started walking like everyone else, that he used to walk strangely, too quietly, too evenly, but now he was normal. Daniel asked what normal meant. Sora said that normal is when you stumble, because everyone stumbles. Daniel smiled. Yoram listened to this conversation from the kitchen. She didn't say anything. In the middle of the 3rd month, the seekers left. So Young brought the news. They had gone around the neighborhood, checked a few houses, found nothing. The tip hadn't been confirmed. They left. Daniel exhaled. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was a reconnaissance mission. The first one. If there was a second tip, the seekers would return. And the second time, they'd be more careful. Daniel worked. It was the only thing he could do. Work. Making things. Being useful. Every item he created for the neighborhood's residents was a brick in the wall between him and the order. Every person he helped was a stone in that wall, not because he planned to use them, but because the people you help don't betray you.
not in a world where everyone depends on everyone else. At the end of the 3rd month, a girl came into the workshop, tall, thin, with short hair and long fingers. She didn't tap her cane, she didn't hold on to a rope. She walked through the door precisely and confidently, like someone who knows exactly where the door is. Yoram greeted her. The girl introduced herself. Kim Sun-hwa, a singer. Daniel flinched, not at the name, at the face. The interface flashed. Subject, Kim Sun-hwa. Alert status, 81%. Hidden pain, false calm. Her face was a mask. She was smiling, but the muscles around her eyes were tense. The corners of her lips were twitching. She was feigning confidence. She was doing it brilliantly. It's not hard to deceive blind people with sound, but Daniel could see the truth in her appearance. This girl was in despair. Sun-hwa said she needed help with the stage, that she was an opera singer, that in a month she had a performance in the Grand Resonance Hall, and that she couldn't find her bearings on stage. Yoram asked what had happened. Sun-hwa paused. Then she said in a steady voice that at the last premiere she had fallen into the orchestra pit. Silence. Yoram said nothing. Daniel saw Yoram press her lips together. Falling into the orchestra pit for a singer in the world of the blind is not just a fall. It's a disgrace. It's proof of incompetence. Everyone in the hall heard it. The thud of a body, the crack of wood, a scream. Sun-hwa said that after that, she couldn't go on stage.
That every time she approaches the edge, she starts to panic. That her legs stop obeying her. That she freezes and can't take a step. She said she'd be replaced soon. That another singer is already learning the part. That if she doesn't return to the stage in a month, she'll never return. Yoram turned to Daniel. Daniel thought, the problem wasn't the singing. The problem was the space. Sun-hwa had lost the map of the stage in her head. The fall had shattered her internal navigation. Every blind person builds a mental map of familiar places. Footsteps, sounds, smells, the texture of the floor. The fall shattered Sun-hwa's map like a hammer shatters glass. The shards remained, but the picture was gone. Daniel said he needed to see the stage. Then he corrected himself, to feel the stage. Yoram raised an eyebrow. Sun-hwa snorted. She said the stage manager's apprentice wanted to fix the opera prima donna's stage. Her voice was sharp, arrogant. But Daniel saw her face. Beneath the mask of arrogance lay despair. She had come to the small workshop in the lower quarter because she had nowhere else to go. He said calmly that he wasn't going to fix the stage, that he was going to make it so the stage itself would tell her where she stood. Sun-hwa fell silent. Then she asked how. Daniel said he needed 3 days. Sun-hwa left. Yoram turned to him. She said that Kim Sun-hwa wasn't just a singer, that she was one of the best sopranos on the East Coast, that if Daniel did something worthwhile for her, the whole city would hear his name. Daniel realized that this was both an opportunity and a threat. The whole city, that meant the order too. But he couldn't refuse, not for the fame, because of Sun-hwa's face, because of the despair hidden beneath her roughness. He knew that despair. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Daniel arrived at the great resonance hall the next morning. Yoram led him through the upper quarter, along guide ropes he had never touched before. The hall stood atop the 3rd hill. From the outside, it was a massive building of dark stone without a single ornament. Inside,
Daniel opened his eyes and froze. The hall was enormous. The ceiling soared 15 meters high. The walls curved in parabolas. Every surface, every curve, every niche was designed for a single purpose: sound. It was a temple of sound. The acoustics were perfect. Daniel snapped his fingers and heard the click travel across the entire hall, bounce off the far wall, and return 2 seconds later, clear and undistorted. Yoram stood beside him, listening to his breathing. She said the hall could hold 800 people, that the best voices on the coast sang here, that the acoustic panels in the hall were arranged so that every listener felt as if they were at the center of the sound. Daniel walked down to the stage. Yoram stayed in the aisle.
He walked down the steps, tapping his cane, but his eyes were open. The stage was wooden, wide, 6 meters deep and 10 meters wide. A drop-off in front, an orchestra pit 2 meters deep. No railing, no tactile markings, nothing, just the edge and the void. Daniel stood at the edge and looked down. A wooden floor of the pit, the musicians' chairs, the instrument stands. If you fell from here with a swing, you could break anything. Sonva fell here, in the dark, in front of 800 people who heard every sound of her fall. Daniel stepped back from the edge. He began to walk across the stage, slowly, counting his steps, tapping his cane, but at the same time, he was looking. The floor was smooth, polished to a shine that no one here could appreciate. No markings, no landmarks. A singer on this stage could only know where he was by memory, by the number of steps from the wings, by the sound of his own voice echoing off the walls. Any mistake in counting, and you're on the edge. Or over the edge. Daniel sat down on the floor in the middle of the stage.
He closed his eyes and began to design. The task: create a navigation system for the stage that works without sight. Conditions: the system must not make any sounds because any extraneous noise during an opera is unacceptable. The system must not be visible, or rather perceptible to a casual observer. Only the performer should know about it. The solution came in 20 minutes. A tactile floor. Not the entire floor, only key points. Thin, raised strips embedded in the wood, invisible to shoes with heels, but perceptible to bare feet or special thin-soled shoes. Daniel opened his eyes and began to sketch. Not on paper, in his head. Center stage, a circular mark the diameter of a palm. 4 lines radiating from it, forward to the edge, back to the wings, left, right. Each line with a different texture, smooth bumps toward the edge, a ribbed strip toward the wings, a dotted line to the left,
a wavy one to the right. The performer steps onto the center mark and immediately knows all 4 directions. Takes 3 steps forward and feels a warning zone underfoot. A wide strip with sharp notches. Stop. Beyond that is the edge. But that's not enough. Songfa doesn't stand still. She moves. She plays a role. Her scenes require movement across the entire stage. Daniel added a second layer. Root lines. Thin grooves in the floor, repeating the trajectories of specific scenes. First aria. Exit from the right wing. 3 steps forward. Turn. 5 steps toward the center. Stop. Sing. Each root is carved into the floor like train tracks. The foot finds the groove and glides along it. No need to count steps. No need to remember distances. The body follows the path on its own. Daniel spent 4 hours in the hall. He measured the stage, memorized the dimensions, tapped each board to gauge the wood's thickness and how deep he could cut. Then he returned to the workshop and began working. 3 days. He barely slept. Yoram brought him food. Sora sat nearby and listened to him cutting the wood. She asked what he was doing. Daniel said he was making a floor. Sora asked why the floor needed grooves. Daniel explained. He said that if you draw a path on the floor, your feet will find their way on their own. Sora thought about it. Then she asked if they could make paths like that at their house, from her room to the kitchen. Daniel froze. Then he said they could. Sora said that then she'd be able to walk at night without having to count her steps, that she sometimes wakes up and wants a drink, but is afraid to walk in the dark. Daniel wanted to say that it's always dark for her, but he didn't. Instead, he said he'd make her a path next week. Sora nodded. Then she said quietly that Uncle Daniel was the most helpful person she knew. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and went back to work. On the 4th day, he brought the pieces into the hall. He worked at night when the hall was empty. He took the boards down one by one. He cut grooves into them. He glued in thin raised strips of sanded bone. He put the boards back up. By morning, the stage looked and sounded exactly the same, but now there was a map underfoot. On the 5th day, Sandha came. Daniel asked her to take off her shoes. Sandha snorted. She said that an opera singer doesn't walk barefoot. Daniel said that an opera singer walks however she wants, but if she doesn't want to fall, it's better go barefoot, at least to start with. Sandha was silent for a moment. Then she took off her shoes. Daniel saw her face. Anger, humiliation, fear. She stood at the edge of the stage and couldn't bring herself to step forward. Her feet were glued to the floor. Daniel walked over. He stood beside her. He said quietly that there was a line right under her left foot. Let her find it with her toes. Sandha pressed her foot against the floor. Her toes felt a thin, ribbed line. Daniel said that this line led to the center of the stage, that she just needed to walk along it, that the line wouldn't end suddenly, that it would lead to a round mark in the middle. Sandha took a step. Her toes slid along the groove. A second step. A third. A fourth. The groove guided her like a rail. On the 5th step, her foot found the circular mark, the center. Sandha stopped. Daniel saw her face change. The fear was fading, slowly, like water from a bathtub. He told her to keep going forward now, that after 4 steps there would be a wide strip with a rough texture. It's a warning. 1 step past it is the edge. Sandha stepped forward. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her foot found the rough strip. Sandha stopped. She was standing a step from the edge, and she knew it. Not because she was counting steps, not because she remembered, because the floor told her. She turned around. A groove led back toward the center. Sandha reached the mark. She turned left. She found another groove, a dotted one. She followed it. She reached the left wing. She turned back. She found a wavy one. She went right. 20 minutes later, she was walking across the stage freely, without counting her steps, without freezing, without gasping for air. An hour later, she began to sing. Daniel sat in the auditorium and listened.
Sun Wa's voice filled the space from floor to ceiling, clear, strong, free. She moved across the stage as if it were her own room. Her feet found their paths. Her body knew where the edges were. Her mind was free for the music. When she finished, silence fell over the hall. Then Sun Wa sat down at the edge of the stage. Her legs dangled over the orchestra pit. She was sitting in the very spot from which she had fallen, and she wasn't afraid. Daniel approached. Sun Wa was silent for a long time. Then, without turning her head, she said she didn't know how to thank him. Her voice was different, not sharp, not arrogant, quiet. Daniel said there was no need to thank him,
That she needed thin shoes with soft soles through which she would feel the furrows even while wearing them. He would have them ready by opening night. Sun Wa turned toward him. Her blind eyes were wet. She said he was strange. Daniel replied that people often told him that. Sun Wa smiled, the first real smile without a mask. Then she said she would tell everyone she knew about him. Daniel wanted to ask her not to tell, but he realized it was useless. The name Kim Sun Wa rang louder than any bell in the city. If she told anyone, everyone would hear it. And Daniel did what he always did. He took the risk and began to think about how to get through it. Sun Wa's premiere took place 3 weeks later. Daniel didn't go. He couldn't take the risk. 800 people in one hall meant 800 pairs of ears that might hear something wrong in his movements. Instead, he sat in his workshop and listened. The hall was 5 blocks away,
But on the night of the premiere, the city fell silent. The market closed early. The smithies fell silent. The bells on the poles were muffled. All of Seoul on the hills was listening. Sun Hwa's voice drifted into the workshop through the open acoustic niches in the walls. Delicate, distant, but clear. She was singing an aria from an old opera written even before the White Dawn. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the voice. It sounded free, without fear, without tension. She was moving across the stage. He knew this because the voice changed position, shifting to the left, to the right, closer to the hall, further away. She walked along his paths. Her feet, in the thin shoes he'd made from soft leather, glided over the grooves. And the voice soared. Sora sat next to him on the workshop floor. She was listening too. When the aria ended, the city was silent for 3 seconds. Then the hall erupted in applause. The sound reached the lower quarter as a muffled rumble. Sora said it was beautiful. Daniel agreed. The next morning, everyone in the upper quarter knew Daniel's name. Sunva kept her word. She told everyone. After the premiere, she was interviewed for the audio newspaper, and she gave his name. The apprentice stagehand from the lower quarter, the man who made the stage safe. Orders poured in, not from the lower quarter, from the upper one, from the commercial district, from the port. People came with requests Daniel hadn't expected. A merchant wanted a counter where goods wouldn't roll onto the floor. A teacher wanted a classroom where children wouldn't get lost between desks. A doctor wanted an operating room where instruments were always at hand. Every request was a design challenge. Every challenge was unique, and Daniel tackled each one just as he had his whole life. Not for everyone, for one person. He would visit the client. He would look at the space. He would look at the person. He would read their face. He saw habits,
He noticed little things that no blind craftsman could have noticed. How a person turned, which hand reached for things, which side of the body led when walking. Then he would go home and design. Yoram could no longer manage on her own. The workshop ran from morning until night. Daniel asked for permission to hire an assistant. Yoram said it was his decision, that the workshop had long since become his. Daniel froze. He looked at her. Yoram was standing at the workbench, holding the tuning fork he had made for her. She said that the workshop bore her name, but the soul of the workshop was already his. That she could hear it, from the sound of the tools, from the footsteps of customers leaving more confidently than when they arrived. Daniel wanted to say something. He couldn't. Yoram smiled. She turned back to the workbench. She continued working. Daniel stood there watching her. Her dark hair with early gray streaks, her thin, sinewy hands, the silver bandage. And for the first time, he thought that in this world without sight, he saw more than he had in his past life, when everyone around him could see as well. A week later, he found an assistant, or rather, the assistant found him herself. Emily Cho appeared in the workshop doorway at noon. She walked in without knocking, without a cane, without a guide rope. She just walked in as if she knew where the door was. Daniel looked up from his work and saw a girl of about 19, short, dark hair, high cheekbones, tanned skin, eyes covered with a white film like everyone else's, but she moved differently, abruptly, confidently, without the caution of a blind person. The interface flashed. Subject, Emily Cho. State, arousal, curiosity, hidden wariness. She said in broken Korean that she had come for a compass. Daniel didn't understand. Emily switched to a mix of Korean and English. She said she was a vendor at the port, that she was being cheated with coins, that the counterfeit coins sounded almost like real ones and she couldn't tell them apart by ear, that she needed a device that could distinguish them. Yoram looked up from her work. She said that Emily was the daughter of Cho Jun-ho from the Port District, that her mother was American, that Emily had gone blind at the age of 12. Emily shrugged. She said she didn't like it when people talked about her in the third person. Daniel smiled. He asked Emily to show him the coins. She pulled a handful out of her pocket. She tossed them onto the table. Daniel looked. 12 coins. Copper with notches along the edge. He saw the difference right away. 4 coins were counterfeit, different metal color, slightly different size. The notches were rougher. But to the touch, the difference was almost imperceptible. And to the sound, too. He picked up 1 real coin and 1 counterfeit. He tossed both onto the table. The sound was almost identical. Almost. The difference in pitch was less than a quarter of a tone. A blind merchant wouldn't hear it. Daniel began to think. He needed an amplifier for the difference, a device that makes a small difference seem big. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he made it. A small wooden box with 2 recesses, one for a coin, the other empty, but connected to the first by a narrow channel. When a coin was placed in the first recess and tapped, the sound traveled through the channel and was amplified. The box's resonance was tuned so that a real coin produced a clear, long ring. A counterfeit produced a dull, short thud. The difference was enormous. Even someone who had never heard a coin could tell the difference. Emily came 3 days later. Daniel placed the device in her hand. He explained how to use it. Emily took a coin. She dropped it into the slot. Click. A ring.
clear and long. She picked up another one, dropped it. Click. A thud, dull and short.
Emily went through all 12 coins in a minute. She separated the real ones from the counterfeits without a single mistake. Then she looked up. Her face was strange. Daniel read a mixture of joy and anger on it. Joy because the device was working, anger because she'd been deceived for 7 years and couldn't do anything about it. Now she could. Emily clenched the device in her palm. She asked how much. Daniel named the price. Emily paid without haggling. Then she said, "He was strange." Daniel said people told him that. Emily smiled, widely, in an American way. Then she said that if he ever needed to get something through the port without any questions asked, he should find her at the 3rd dock. And she left. Yoram listened to the whole conversation from the corner of the workshop. When the door closed, she said quietly that Emily Cho wasn't just a merchant, that she was a smuggler, that things the Order of Silence forbids pass through her. Old picture books, lamps not made to the guild standards, tools from across the sea. Daniel asked why the order forbade such things. Yoram paused. Then she said that the order forbade anything that reminded them of sight. Pictures are useless to the blind, so they're for the sighted. So they're dangerous. Daniel sat down. He began to grasp the scale of what he was facing. The Order of Silence wasn't just hunting the sighted. The Order was destroying the very idea of sight. It was purging the world of everything related to eyes, to light, to color. The world wasn't just going blind. The world was forgetting what it had once seen. And someone was helping it forget, very carefully. The 6th month. Winter had come early. Daniel knew this because he saw frost on the walls of the houses in the mornings, delicate white patterns on the dark stone. No one but him knew they were beautiful. The workshop was open every day. Daniel took on 3 orders a week, no more. Each order took time. He couldn't work faster without giving himself away. Yoram continued to adjust the lamps. They worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the same workbench. Sometimes their hands brushed against each other. Yoram didn't pull hers away. Neither did Daniel. One evening, Yoram asked him to adjust a lamp she couldn't get right. The problem was with the 3rd plate. The overtone was drifting off to the side, and Yoram couldn't figure out why. Daniel took a look. The plate was slightly warped. Not from age, from temperature. The winter cold caused the metal to contract by a microscopic amount. In the summer, the lamp sounded perfect. In the winter, it went out of tune. Daniel told Yoram that it might be the temperature, that the metal changes shape in the cold. Yoram froze. She said that in 15 years of work, not a single tuner had ever told her about the effect of temperature on the plates. Daniel realized he'd said too much again. He added quickly that he'd heard it somewhere, that he didn't remember where. Yoram didn't reply. She took the plate, held it in her palms, warmed it with her breath. She placed it in the lamp. She turned it on. The overtone fell into place. Yoram turned to him. Her face was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Tenderness, sadness, gratitude, and something else, something he was afraid to name. She said quietly that he reminded her of something. Daniel asked what. She said a color. Daniel held his breath.
Yoram said she had gone blind at the age of 7, that she remembered colors, not clearly, like music heard once and never again. She remembers that the sky was something. Not a sound, not a shape. Something else. Something she saw with her eyes. And that Daniel, next to her, feels like that something. Like a forgotten color. Daniel was silent. Yoram was silent too. Then she went back to work. They didn't speak again that evening, but Daniel lay awake that night, thinking about what she had said. She remembers colors.
The only one in this city, maybe the only one on the coast. And she said he felt like a color. She didn't know how right she was. A week later was the Festival of Bells, the main festival of the blind community. Daniel learned about it from Sora. The girl had talked about it every day for a month. According to tradition, families made commemorative gifts for the elderly, usually carved figurines, symbols of people or places that were gone. Sora wanted to make a gift for her grandmother, Han Un Suk, Yirim's mother, 84 years old, confined to her bed on the 2nd floor. Daniel had seen her twice, a small, frail woman with white hair and hands like birds' feet. She hardly spoke. She lay there and listened. Sometimes she ran her fingers along the wall next to the bed, over a tactile photograph, a relief copy of a photograph taken before the white dawn. There were 2 people in the photograph, a man and a woman by the sea. Daniel looked at the relief. The figures were rough, Schematic. The faces were indistinguishable. The sea was marked by wavy lines. That was all that remained of a moment that had once been alive. Daniel made up his mind. He knew what he would do, but he needed help. He went to Emily. He explained that he needed an old audio recording, a tape with a voice, a man's voice, Han Un Suk's husband. Emily asked how he planned to find a recording of a man who had died 20 years ago. Daniel said that in this world, a voice is the most valuable thing a person has, that voice recordings are stored, that there must be an archive. Emily thought for a moment. Then she said she knew a place, an old archive of sound recordings in the Port District, semi-legal. The order had wanted to shut it down, but hadn't been able to find it. She would lead the way. 3 days later, Daniel was standing in the basement of a port warehouse. Around him, thousands of wax cylinders lay on the shelves, sound recordings, the voices of the living and the dead. He searched for 2 hours. Emily helped. She read the labels on the cylinders. Finally, they found it. Han Desu, a recording of a celebratory speech from 32 years ago, an old man's voice, soft, hoarse. He spoke of his wife, of the sea, of the sunset they had watched together on the last day before the white dawn. Daniel listened and felt his throat tighten. This man had seen the sunset, and remembered it, and spoke of it 20 years after the world had stopped seeing. Daniel took the recording and began to build. He worked for 2 weeks, every night, in the corner of the workshop. Yoram didn't ask what he was doing. Sora tried to peek, or rather, to eavesdrop. Daniel sent her to bed. He made the following: a wooden frame 2 meters by 1.5, a shell floor at the bottom, real shells that Emily had brought from the harbor, stones between the shells, heated, warm, smoothed by water until they were smooth. On top of the frame, a strip of cloth soaked in oil that smelled of the sea, salt, seaweed, wet sand. At the head of the bed, an acoustic lamp, but not an ordinary one.
modified. Inside it, the sound of the surf mixed with Han Dae-soo's voice. The voice didn't speak any words. It was a backdrop, distant, warm, as if a person were standing on the shore, saying something indistinct, yet familiar. On the evening of the Festival of Bells, Daniel carried the structure into Un-suk's room. Yerim helped. Sora carried the seashells. Daniel spread everything out on the floor next to the bed. He turned on the lamp. The sound of the surf filled the room. Then a voice. Quiet, distant. Han Dae-soo was talking about the sunset. Un-suk was lying on the bed. Then she slowly turned over. She dangled her legs. Yerim wanted to help. Daniel stopped her. Un-suk lowered her legs to the floor. Her feet touched the seashells. She froze. Then she sank down. She lay down on the seashells.
She placed her palms on the warm stones. She closed her eyes, even though they were already closed. But this was a different kind of closing. She was drifting away somewhere, inside. Her husband's voice floated above her. The sound of the sea embraced her from all sides. The seashells pricked her back like a real shoreline. The stones warmed her like a real sun. And the old woman, who was 84 years old and hadn't left the room in 11 years, said quietly and clearly that she could see him. Silence. Yerim stood in the doorway. Her hand gripped the door frame so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Sora stood beside her. Emily stood behind them. She had come to bring the last batch of seashells and stayed. And Yuna. Yuna, whom Daniel didn't know yet, was standing on the stairs. She had come to see Yerim on guild business. She heard a voice from the room and froze. 5 women stood in the doorway, listening as the old woman spoke to her dead husband on a seashore that didn't exist. None of them saw it. They all felt it. Daniel stood in the corner. He saw Un-suk's face, a smile, the first in years. And he saw the faces of everyone else. And he knew that at that moment, something had changed. Not for him, for them. Each of them was thinking the same thought. They didn't know exactly what it was. They couldn't put it into words, but Daniel saw it on their faces. This man isn't from here, and we will protect him. Yuna came to the workshop the next day. Daniel opened the door and saw the woman who had been standing on the stairs the previous evening, short, muscular, short hair, a scar on her right cheek, from her ear to her chin. Her eyes were open, milky like everyone else's, but her gaze was different, empty. Not the blind emptiness Daniel was used to, the emptiness of a person who had seen something they shouldn't have. The interface flashed.
Subject, Cho Yuna. Condition, chronic anxiety, suppressed panic, nervous system exhaustion.
Yuna didn't say hello. She walked in. She closed the door behind her. She ran her fingers along the wall until she found a stool. She sat down. She said she needed a device, that she'd heard that the apprentice Yerim made things for specific people, that she had a specific problem. Daniel sat down across from her. He asked what it was. Yuna paused. Then she said she was a scout for the Listeners Guild, that a year ago she had gone to the Quiet Zone, that out of a 6-person squad, She was the only one who returned. Daniel was silent. He looked at her face, at the scar, at her hands which lay on her knees, palms up. Her fingers trembled slightly. Una continued. She said that the silent zone was a place where there was no sound at all. No echo, no rustle, not even one's own breath. A person enters it and finds themselves in absolute emptiness.
A blind person without sound is a person without a single point of reference. No sight, no hearing, only smell and touch. Feet on the ground, and that's it. Her squad entered the zone at dawn. An hour later, they lost track of each other. The rope that bound them snapped. Or someone cut it. Una didn't know. She called out to her comrades, but the sound didn't travel. The words died on her lips. She screamed and couldn't hear her own scream. For 5 hours she crawled on the ground, on her hands, on her knees, trying to find the edge of the zone, to find a place where sound returns. She found it, barely alive, with raw palms and a broken finger. Her comrades didn't return. 5 of them. Not a single one. Since then, Una couldn't be in quiet rooms. Any room where the echo died down triggered a panic attack in her. Her heart would start pounding, her hands shook, her breath came in gasps. She hadn't slept properly in 2 years, because at night the city fell silent.
And the silence brought her back to the zone. Daniel listened. He looked at her face and saw every word, not on her lips, on her skin, on her muscles, on the veins in her temples that were throbbing too fast. This woman lived in constant terror, every second, even now. Sitting on a stool in the workshop where 3 acoustic lamps hummed, she was on the edge. The interface confirmed it. Heart rate 134. Cortisol critical. Daniel asked what exactly she wanted. Una said she wanted silence that didn't kill. She wanted to sleep. She wanted to close the door to her room and not feel the walls closing in. Daniel thought for 2 days. The problem was psychological, but the solution had to be physical. Una needed a sound that she could control, not someone else's, not the city's, her own, personal. A sound that belonged only to her and that no quiet zone could take away. He made a belt. A wide leather belt with 4 small metal capsules.
In each capsule was a thin plate tuned to a specific frequency. When a person moved, the capsules vibrated, barely audible, quieter than a whisper. But the vibration created a miniature sound field around the body, a personal echo, a 3-meter radius. Within this field, a person always heard the reflection, always knew where the walls were, where the floor was, where the ceiling was. The field moved with the body. Una could go anywhere, and her 3 meters of sound went with her. A small, portable world in which she was not alone. Una came for the belt 3 days later. Daniel fastened it on her. Una stood up. The belt chimed, quietly, like a distant stream. Una took a step. The sound shifted with her. She raised her hand. The echo from the wall returned instantly. Soft, warm. She took another step, and another. She walked around the workshop. Then she stopped. Her face was motionless. Daniel read it. The tension was fading, slowly, layer by layer, like paint being washed away with water. Her jaw relaxed. Her shoulders dropped. Her fingers stopped trembling.
Una stood in the middle of the workshop and listened to her own sound. Then she said she wanted to test it. Daniel asked how. Una said there was a storage room in the basement of the workshop, stone, with thick walls, almost echo-free. She wanted to go in there. Daniel led her downstairs. He opened the door to the storeroom. Una went in. The walls were thick. The sound faded. But the belt was working. Its quiet vibration filled the small space. The walls echoed. The ceiling responded. Una stood in the echo-free room and heard the world around her. She stood there for 5 minutes. 10. 15. Daniel waited by the door. He could see her in the dim light. She wasn't moving. She was just breathing. Evenly. Deeply. For the first time in 2 years, evenly and deeply. When she came out, her face was wet. She wasn't crying, or maybe she was, but silently, without a sound.
As she'd grown accustomed to in the quiet zone. She said she'd try to sleep tonight. Daniel nodded. Una walked to the door. She stopped, turned around, said she didn't know who he was, that he didn't resemble any of the masters she'd met, that masters make things, but he does something else. Daniel asked what. Una said, he restores. Then she left. Yoram stood at the top of the stairs and listened. When Daniel came up, she asked who that woman was. Daniel said she was a scout, that she had gone into the quiet zone and come back alone. Yoram fell silent. Then she said quietly that she knew about the quiet zones, that they were growing, that every year they crept closer, that in 5 years, maybe sooner, they would reach the city. And then it wouldn't matter who was pretending to be whom, because in the silence, everyone is equal. Daniel looked at her. Yoram stood with her back to him, a silver blindfold over her eyes, her hands at her sides. She said she didn't know his secret. But she knew one thing, that when the quiet zones came, she'd want him to be there. Daniel said he would be. Yoram reached out her hand. He took it. She squeezed his fingers, briefly, firmly. Then she let go and went back to her room. Daniel stood in the dark workshop. For the first time in 6 months in this world, he didn't feel alone. Una returned a week later. She had slept 4 nights in a row, for the first time in 2 years. 4 nights without nightmares, without waking up in a cold sweat, without a scream stuck in her throat. She didn't come to thank him. She came to talk. Una sat down on her stool, the same one as last time. Daniel noticed that she had already memorized the workshop. 3 steps from the door, turn right, the stool by the wall. She moved precisely, confidently. The belt jingled softly around her waist. She said she had to tell him about the quiet zones. Daniel asked why him. Una said because he was the only person who had made her something that worked. That other masters had given her tuning forks and bells and told her to wear them around her neck. That didn't help. Her belt helps, because it works differently. Not like a tool, like a part of the body. And a person who thinks that way can understand what she's going to tell him. Daniel listened. Una spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. The silent zones appeared 15 years ago. The first one appeared in the south, a fishing village on the coast.
One morning, the residents woke up and discovered that there was no sound in the western part of the village. No footsteps, no voices carried. The bells were silent. They marked off the zone and gave it a wide berth. A year later, a second one appeared, then a third, then a 10th. Now there are more than 50 zones along the coast. They are growing, slowly but unstoppably. Each zone expands by about a meter a month. The zones don't connect to one another, not yet.
But if they keep growing, in 5 years the nearest zone will reach the outer neighborhoods of Solnahoma.
Daniel asked what was inside the zones. Una fell silent. Then she said that there were creatures inside the zones. The voiceless. Daniel had heard that word before, from Soyeon Ho, from the merchants at the market. Whispered, like a word that must not be spoken aloud. Una said that the voiceless were creatures that made no sound, none at all. No footsteps, no breathing, no heartbeat. In a world where everyone relies on sound, they are invisible, completely. A blind person cannot detect them, not by sound, not by smell. They hunt. Una didn't know exactly how they found their prey, but her 6-person squad lost 5 members in a single day. She heard them fall, one after another. The sound of a body hitting the ground, and then silence. She didn't know what was killing them, didn't know how. She only knew it was nearby, that she could sense it, not by hearing,
Not by smell, by something else.
her skin, the pressure of the air, the heat, or the lack of heat. She said that when the voiceless one was nearby, the air grew colder. Not by much, by a degree or two, but she could feel it. And every time she felt it, she fell to the ground and froze. And the voiceless one passed by. 5 times. 5 times she lay on the ground and listened to the silence, and something passed by, so close that she felt the movement of the air against her face. Daniel sat and listened. His interface was working. He saw Una's face change, how her heart rate rose with every word, how her fingers trembled, how her teeth clenched. She was reliving it all over again, every time she told the story. He didn't interrupt. Una finished. Then she said that the silent zones weren't a natural phenomenon. Daniel asked why she thought so. Una said that nature doesn't create perfect silence, that even in the deepest forest there's the rustle of the wind,
That even underground there's the rumble of rock. The silent zones are absolute.
there isn't a single sound in them. It's not the absence of sound sources, it's the suppression of sound. Something is actively destroying sound waves inside the zones. It's technology. Or something like technology, Daniel thought. Something is suppressing sound. Something is hunting in the silence. Creatures that make no sound. In a world where people rely solely on hearing, it was the perfect weapon. Take away sound, and a person is helpless, blind and deaf at the same time. Pray. He asked Una if she had seen the voiceless. Una flinched. Then she understood the question. She said that see was a word they didn't use here, that she hadn't encountered the voiceless directly, that they were, in fact, voiceless, without a voice, without sound, without a presence. They couldn't be detected by any of the senses a blind person possesses. Daniel clenched his teeth. A blind person. But he had one more sense.
He could see. And if the voiceless exist in the physical world, then they have a form, a body, a silhouette, something that can be seen with the eyes. He didn't say this out loud, but the thought took root. He asked Una if the guild of listeners knew how to fight the voiceless. Una smiled, a bitter, brief smile. She said that the guild sends scouts into the zones. The scouts don't return. The guild sends new ones. They don't return either. In 15 years, the guild had lost more than 200 people and learned nothing, because it's impossible to scout an enemy you can't detect. It was a war in which one side was completely invisible to the other. Daniel said there might be another way. Una asked what it was. Daniel said he'd think about it. Una stood up. She reached the door. She stopped. She said she'd come back in 3 days, that if he had an idea, she'd listen, that if he didn't, she'd come anyway, because his workshop was a good place to be. The belt jingles.
The lamps hum. And for the first time in 2 years, she doesn't feel like running away. She left. Daniel sat alone in the workshop. Yoram was on a job in the upper quarter. Sora was at school. He thought. The voiceless. Creatures without sound. In the world of the blind, they are invisible. But he sees. He can see them. He can be the eyes for the blind fighters. But to do that, he must reveal his secret, at least partially, to at least one person. And that person could destroy him or save him. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The interface flickered in his peripheral vision, the faint outlines of the furniture, the amber glow of safe surfaces, the blue chill of the walls. He thought of Una, of her story, about the voiceless, about the quiet zones creeping toward the city, and he realized one thing. He could no longer be just a master. The workshop saved lives, but the quiet zones destroyed them faster. He needed something more than canes and tuning forks.
He needed a weapon, but not for himself, for blind people who cannot see the enemy. He needed to design a way to see the voiceless, without eyes, through other senses, through vibrations, through temperature, through air currents, through anything a person without sight could feel. It was the most difficult design challenge of his life, in both lives, and he didn't know where to start. Daniel worked on the device for 3 weeks. During the day, he took orders. At night, he designed. The idea was simple. The voiceless make no sound, but they are physical beings. They move, so they displace air. Any body moving through space creates a pressure wave in front of it, not a sound wave, a mechanical one. Air compresses in front of a moving object and expands behind it. Human skin is too coarse a sensor to feel this, but if the signal were amplified... Daniel remembered his compass for Emily, a small box that turned a barely perceptible difference in the clinking of coins into something obvious.
The same principle. Take a weak signal and amplify it. He started with a membrane, a thin film of bull's bladder stretched over a ring, sensitive to the slightest air pressure. When something moves nearby, the membrane bends. The deflection is tiny, thinner than a strand of hair. But if you attach a thin needle to the membrane and lower the needle into a cup of water, the membrane's deflection creates ripples on the water. The ripples create sound. Quiet, but audible. For a blind person with a trained ear, that's enough. Daniel built the first prototype in 5 days. Rough, clumsy, a wooden casing, a membrane made from a bull's bladder, a needle made from fish bone, a cup of water inside, a device the size of a fist. He tested it in his workshop. He closed his eyes. He placed the device on the table. He asked Sora to walk quietly past it. Sora tiptoed by. The membrane quivered. The needle swayed. The water rippled. A soft splash. Daniel heard it, but Sora weighed 30 kilograms and was walking a meter away from the device. The voiceless one could be larger or smaller, and it could have been moving 5 meters away. He needed to increase the sensitivity 10-fold. Daniel redesigned the prototype 4 times. He changed the thickness of the membrane, the length of the needle, the depth of the water, the shape of the cup. Each variable affected the result. After the 4th iteration, the device detected human movement at a distance of 3 meters. Not perfect, but it was a start. The problem lay elsewhere. The device was stationary. The cup of water couldn't move. Any tilt and the water would splash out. It would work for defending a wall or a house entrance. For reconnaissance in the quiet zone, it was useless. A portable version was needed. Daniel thought about it for 4 days. Then the solution came to him at night. Not water. Sand. Fine, dry sand poured in a thin layer onto the membrane.
When the membrane vibrates, the grains of sand bounce. The bouncing grains create a soft rustling sound. The rustling is audible, and the sand doesn't splash when moved. Daniel redesigned the device. He replaced the water with sand. He made the casing smaller. Now it fit in the palm of his hand. He strapped it to his forearm and walked around the workshop. It works. When Yoram entered the room, the device rustled 2 seconds before Daniel heard her footsteps. He showed the device to Yuna. She came as promised. Every 3 days. She sat down on her stool. She listened. Daniel tied the device to her wrist. He asked her to cover her ears with her palms. Then he walked quietly past her. Yuna took her hands away from her ears. She said she heard a rustling on her wrist. That he had passed on the right. 2 meters away. Daniel confirmed it. Yuna was silent. Then she said that if it works on people, it might work on the voiceless. If the voiceless are physical. If they move air.
If they aren't ghosts. Daniel said that ghosts don't kill 5 scouts in a day.
Yuna smiled. Her first smile without bitterness. She said she wanted to test the device in the field, not in the quiet zone, not yet, but in the training room of the Listeners Guild. Daniel agreed. 2 days later, Yuna brought him to the guild's barracks, a low stone building in the eastern part of the city. The training hall was in the basement. Thick walls, minimal echo, almost like the quiet zone. Yuna explained that this is where scouts are trained. They teach them to navigate in conditions of suppressed sound. There were 3 people in the hall. Scouts, young, with blindfolds and light armor made of boiled leather. Yuna told them she had brought an experimental device, that she wanted to check if it worked. She asked one of them to put felt pads on his shoes and move silently through the hall. The scout put on the pads. His footsteps became almost inaudible.
Yuna fastened the device to the second scout's wrist.
He stood in the center of the hall, listening. The first scout began to move, quietly, slowly, like a shadow. A minute passed. The device on the second scout's wrist rustled. He turned his head. He said it was to the right, 3 meters. Yuna asked the first scout. He confirmed it. They repeated the test 10 times. 8 out of 10 times, the device worked correctly. Twice, it gave a false signal from a draft coming through the door. Yuna took off the device. She turned it over in her hands. Then she turned to Daniel. Her face was serious. She said that this changed everything, that if the device were refined, the scouts would be able to detect the voiceless. For the first time in 15 years. She said she would show the device to the guild commander. Daniel asked her not to mention his name. Una asked why. Daniel said he didn't want the attention. Una was silent for a moment. Then she said she understood.
That she wouldn't mention it, but that sooner or later he would have to step out of the shadows, because the things he does are too important to hide. Daniel didn't answer. He was thinking about something else. The device was working, but it only detected movement. It didn't kill. It didn't protect. A scout could find out that the voiceless was nearby, and then what? Run or fight an enemy you can't see. The next step was needed. Daniel started thinking about it on the way home. Una walked beside him. The belt jingled at her waist. The device lay in her pocket. They were silent. Then Una said she wanted to ask him something. Daniel told her to go ahead. Una said that his devices worked better than they should, that Emily's compass was better than any appraiser's tool in the port, that her belt was better than any acoustic lamp, that Sonhua's tactile floor was better than anything the Architects Guild had made in 30 years. She asked how he does it, not where he learned it.
Not who his teacher is, how he does it. How does he know exactly what each specific person needs? Daniel was silent. Then he said, "He watches." Una stopped. The word hung between them. He watches. In a world where no one watches. Daniel realized what he had said. He corrected himself. He said he listens and feels, that it's the same thing. Una didn't move. Then she walked on. She said nothing, but Daniel saw her face in the light of a distant street lamp. She was thinking. She was piecing together the facts. A master who does the impossible, who walks without bumping into walls, who turns his head toward faces, not sounds, who said he was watching. Una was a scout. She knew how to piece together facts, and Daniel realized she was already close to the answer. The 9th month. The morning began with a visit. Daniel heard footsteps on the street even before the knock on the door. 4 heavy boots. A steady rhythm. Not clients. Clients knock hesitantly. These walked like people who were used to entering any door. Daniel opened his eyes. The interface flashed. 4 outlines behind the door. Amber, cold blue, cold blue, cold blue. 1 neutral, neutral. 3 dangerous. A knock. Yoram came out of the kitchen. Her face was calm, but Daniel saw the knuckles on her tuning fork turn white. She opened the door. A man's voice, steady, soft, without threat, without warmth. The voice said he needed an apprentice named Daniel, that he had come to investigate a tip from the guild. Yoram asked which guild. The voice replied, "The Order of Silence." Daniel stood at the workbench. His hands continued to sand the workpiece. He forced himself not to stop. A blind man working with his hands would not pause at the sound of a stranger's voice at the door. He was used to not seeing who had come in. He simply worked and listened. Daniel worked and listened. 4 people entered. The first was tall, thin, in a long hooded cloak. Daniel could see his face. Narrow, pale. His eyes were covered with a thin black cloth. Not silver like the tuner's bandages, black, military. An animal moved beside him, a dog, large, short-haired, off-leash. The dog didn't move like a pet, like a tool, precise, purposeful. It was sniffing the air. A tracking dog. Daniel remembered. Dogs trained to pick up the scent of adrenaline, to the chemistry of people who move too confidently in unfamiliar places, to the scent of someone who isn't afraid. Daniel forced himself to be afraid, not to pretend, for real. He remembered the training, the weeks when he walked blindfolded. His body remembered the fear. He let go of control, let his hands tremble, let his breathing quicken, let sweat break out on his palms. He was afraid. It wasn't hard, because he was truly afraid. The tracking dog, the dog over to him. The dog sniffed his hands, his neck, his face. Daniel didn't move. He stood hunched over the workbench. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes were closed.
The face of a blind man, frightened by the visit of strangers. The dog sniffed and walked away.
The tracker asked his name. Daniel told him. His voice trembled. The tracker asked where he was from. Daniel said he didn't remember, that he'd lost his memory after the fall. The tracker asked how long he'd been here. Daniel said 9 months, that Yoram had taken him in, that he was an apprentice. The tracker turned to Yoram. He asked if she confirmed it. Yoram confirmed it. Her voice was steady, calm, not overly confident, not overly frightened. The perfect tone of a woman who respects the order and is a little nervous but has nothing to hide. Daniel silently thanked her. The seeker walked through the workshop. His fingers slid along the walls, along the workbench, over the shelves. He touched the tools, the lamps, the blanks. He was looking for something. Daniel didn't know what. Then he realized. The seeker was looking for things a blind master shouldn't have. Mirrors, glass, lenses.
Anything related to sight. There was nothing like that in the workshop.
There never had been. Daniel had made sure of that during the first week. The seeker finished his inspection. He returned to the door. The second and third stood silently by the wall. They hadn't moved the entire time the inspection was underway, but Daniel saw that their hands were on the hilts of short blades. The investigator said the tip had not been confirmed, that the workshop was clean, that the apprentice was registered with the guild and had references, but that he was leaving the case open, that he might return. Then he turned to Daniel. He said calmly that he should be careful on the stairs. Daniel froze. The stairs. The investigator knew. He knew about the stairs. This wasn't a random visit. Someone had reported specifically about the stairs, and the seeker said this out loud, not as a threat, as a statement. I know you don't walk the stairs like a blind man. I haven't found any proof, but I know.
The 4 of them left. The dog was the last to leave. The door closed.
Yoram stood motionless. Daniel stood motionless. Sora was sitting upstairs. She didn't come down during the visit. Yoram told her to stay in the room. The silence lasted a minute. Then Yoram sat down on a stool. She said it wasn't just any seeker, that it was a first-rank seeker, that such beings come only by order of the arch-listener. Daniel asked who the arch-listener was. Yoram said, John Beck Ho,
head of the eastern branch of the Order of Silence, a man who has been searching for seers for 30 years, who has found and destroyed everyone he has learned of, who is never wrong, who doesn't come himself until he's certain, but when he does come, he doesn't come to arrest. He comes to finish. Daniel sat down on the floor. His legs wouldn't hold him. Yoram continued. She said that Bek Ho had lost his wife and youngest son 30 years ago, that they had been killed by a creature from the quiet zone.
That this creature had been brought into the house by his eldest son, who had retained his sight after the white dawn. Beko believes that the sighted attract the voiceless. That sight is a beacon. That every sighted person on the planet is a hole in the shield that the white dawn placed between people and what is coming. Daniel listened, and inside him, something cold and heavy sank to the bottom. Because there was logic in Beko's words. The voiceless hunt in silence. Quiet zones suppress sound, but the voiceless cannot hear. They see. Una said there is no sound in the quiet zone, but she didn't say there is no light. There is light. And if the voiceless see light, if they hunt for light, then a sighted person with functioning eyes is a source of something that attracts them. Not light, literally, but something related to sight, to functioning optic nerves, to a brain that processes visual information. Daniel covered his face with his hands. If Bako is right, then every day Daniel lives in this city, he puts everyone around him in danger. Every day he is a beacon. Every day the quiet zones creep a little closer to him. Yoram was silent. She didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't know his secret. But she said one thing. She said that whatever the truth was, she wouldn't let him leave this house. That he was part of the family. That Sora wouldn't survive if he left. That she herself wouldn't survive. Daniel took his hands away from his face. He looked at her. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, a silver headband, her back straight, her hands clenched into fists. She didn't see him, but she was standing facing him directly, by the sound of her breathing. Daniel said he wouldn't go anywhere. Yoram nodded, turned around, went into the kitchen. Daniel could hear her clattering with the dishes, louder than usual, because her hands were shaking. Daniel gathered everyone, not to reveal a secret, to prepare. He called it a workshop meeting. Yorim, Sora, Una, Emily, Sunwa, Hana. 6 of them. Those who stood in the doorway when Grandma Unsuk lay down on the shell-strewn shore. Those who decided to protect him in silence. The meeting was in the evening. Sora sat on the floor next to her mother's stool. Una stood by the wall. Emily sat on the workbench, dangling her feet. Sunwa took the only chair. Hana arrived last. Quiet, tired, with dark circles under her eyes that only Daniel could see. Daniel told them about the quiet zones. Not everything, only what he'd learned from Una, that the zones are growing, that in 5 years they'll reach the city, that inside the zones there are creatures that can't be detected, that the Guild of Listeners has lost 200 people in 15 years and hasn't found a way to fight them. Then he showed them the device, a membrane filled with sand. He explained how it worked. He showed how it works.
He asked Una to confirm the test results.
Una confirmed them.
The room was silent. Then Hannah spoke up. She said that people from settlements near the quiet zones are being brought to the clinic more and more often, wounded, maimed, some unconscious. They can't explain what happened to them. They only say that it went quiet. And then the pain. Emily said there were rumors going around the port, that trade caravans had started disappearing on the southern routes. 3 caravans in the last month. The routes ran close to the quiet zones. Not a single person returned. Sanhua said there was a concert for the city council in the Great Resonance Hall last week. After the concert, the councilors discussed evacuation, in whispers, among themselves. They thought no one could hear them. Sanhua heard. She was standing backstage. Daniel listened. The picture was coming together. The city knew about the threat. The authorities knew. But no one did anything because there was no tool. You can't fight an enemy you can't detect.
You can't evacuate the city without knowing where to go, because the silent zones surrounded the coast on all sides. He said he had a plan. Not a complete one, a start. The first step is to refine the detection device to a level where it can be issued to every guild scout. The second step is to figure out exactly how the voiceless kill. To do that, we need to go into the quiet zone. Una flinched. Her belt clinked sharply. She said he was crazy. Daniel said he wasn't going alone, that he needed Una, that he needed a team, that he needed someone who knew the zone from the inside. Una was silent for a long time. Then she said she would go. But not until the device was working at 10 out of 10, not 8, 10. Daniel nodded. Emily said she'd provide supplies, that she had contacts at the port, that through her they could get everything they needed, no questions asked. Sanhua said she was useless in combat, but that she had a voice. That if they needed to distract the city or make a racket, she'd sing so loud the walls would shake. Hannah said quietly that if anyone came back from the zone wounded, she'd be waiting, that she'd get everything ready, that the children at the clinic would wait one more day. Yoram was silent longer than anyone else. Then she said she wouldn't go into the zone, that she would stay home with Sora, that she would wait, and that if he didn't come back, she would find him, just like she found him the first time, on the street, unconscious, near the 3rd rail. Sora said she wanted to help too. Yoram said it was time for Sora to go to bed. Sora said she was 10 years old and that she wasn't little. Yoram said that was exactly why it was time for her to go to bed, because grown-ups go to bed on time. Sora snorted, but she got up and went upstairs. She turned around on the stairs. She said Uncle Daniel had to come back, because he promised to make her a path from her room to the kitchen. And she's still waiting. Daniel said he would, when he gets back. Sora left. 6 adults were sitting in the workshop. Beyond the walls, the city rang with evening bells. Somewhere far to the south, the quiet zones were creeping a meter closer. Daniel spent the next 3 months preparing. He refined the detection device. He replaced the bull's bladder with the thinnest membrane made of fish skin. He doubled its sensitivity. Now it picked up movement at 5 meters, 10 out of 10 in the training hall. Una trained every day. The belt jingled at her waist. The device rustled on her wrist. She was teaching her body anew to move in silence, not to be afraid, to listen to the rustle of sand,
to trust the device. In 3 months, she had become a different person. Her back had straightened, her movements had become fluid, her voice had grown stronger. She slept every night. She didn't take the belt off, even in her sleep. Daniel made 10 detection devices, 1 for himself, 1 for Una, 8 for the scouts Una had selected, the best. Those who hadn't yet been to the zone, the young ones, fast, ready. Emily gathered supplies, ropes, food, water, thick felt hoods that could be pulled over the face to breathe more quietly, soft boots without heels, knives with wrapped handles so they wouldn't jingle. Hannah set up a first aid station, bandages, ointments, splints, painkillers made from mountain bark powder. Sanva had learned 3 signal arias, short, powerful phrases that could be sung at the top of her lungs. If the squad got into trouble near the zone's wall and needed a sound from outside, Sanva would sing. Her voice would carry any distance. Yoram had tuned 10 acoustic lamps to maximum power. If the squad exited the zone disoriented, the lamps would become beacons, sounding fires by which the blind fighters would find their way back. By the end of the 12th month, everything was ready. The squad set out at dawn. Daniel led the way. Una was beside him.
Behind them were 8 scouts, tied together with a rope, 2 meters between each one, detection devices on their wrists, knives on their belts, felt masks over their faces. The nearest quiet zone was a 6-hour walk to the south. Small, one of the first. About 300 meters in diameter, according to the guild. The road wound through the hills, past abandoned villages. There hadn't been any guide ropes here for a long time. Posts with bells lay toppled over. Tactile tiles were overgrown with moss. Civilization was retreating. Daniel walked with his eyes open. For the first time in a year, he wasn't hiding. There was no one here. The fields were empty. Houses stood with collapsed roofs. The world outside the city was dying. He could see it. The scouts couldn't see it. They could hear it. The silence. The closer they got to the zone, the quieter it became around them. The birds fell silent. The wind died down. Footsteps on the ground sounded muffled, as if the earth were absorbing the sound. An hour before the zone, Una stopped the squad. She said it would be quieter from there on, that everyone had to check their device. The scouts checked. Sand rustled against the membranes. Everything was working. Una said the plan was simple. Go in, move forward 50 meters, survey the area, exit. No heroics, no deviations from the route. Don't let go of the rope. If the device rustles, everyone drops to the ground and freezes. No exceptions. Daniel nodded. Then he remembered that 8 out of 10 people in the squad couldn't see his nod. He said aloud that he understood. They entered the zone. Daniel sensed the boundary, not with his ears, through the interface. The contours in his field of vision changed. The amber safety lines faded. Everything turned gray-blue, cold, and brighter, much brighter, as if the interface compensated for the loss of sound by amplifying the visual information. He could see every blade of grass, every stone, every crack in the ground. And he saw that there was nothing alive inside the zone. No grass, no insects, no moss. The ground was bare, gray, dead. The sound vanished, completely. Daniel opened his mouth and tried to say a word. His lips moved.
His vocal cords vibrated, but the sound didn't travel. It died a hand's breadth from his face. Una was breathing beside him. He saw her chest rise and fall, but he heard neither her inhalation nor her exhalation. The belt around her waist didn't jingle. The capsules vibrated, but the sound didn't leave them. Una was in silence. Daniel saw her face tense, her lips turn white, her hands tremble. But the belt was working, not with sound, with vibration. Una felt the capsules vibrating against her skin, and that was enough. She didn't fall. She didn't stop. She kept walking. They walked 30 meters. The devices on their wrists were silent. The sand didn't rustle, because there was nothing to rustle. The sound didn't carry. Daniel realized it.
The device was useless in the zone. It worked on sound. The sand created a rustle, but inside the zone, the rustle died. The membrane vibrated, but no one could hear it.
Damn it! He hadn't accounted for that. The device worked outside the zone. Inside, it was dead, like everything else. Daniel grabbed Una by the shoulder. She turned. He couldn't say a word to her. He pointed at the device. He shook his head. Una understood. Her face went stiff, but she didn't panic. The training had paid off. She squeezed his hand twice. 2 squeezes. The code. We continue. Daniel hesitated. The device isn't working. The squad is deaf and blind. Only he can see. Only he could warn them. But he couldn't warn them with sound, so they needed another way. The rope. He tugged the rope twice. The stop signal traveled down the line. The squad froze. Daniel crouched down. He took Una's hand. He began writing on her palm with his finger. Letters. Slowly. Device. No, it's working. In the zone. I will be
watching. Una froze. He kept writing. Pulling.
The rope. Once. Stop. Twice. Move forward. 3 times. Danger. Everyone. 2. The ground. Una squeezed his hand. 1 squeeze. Understood. She passed the signal down the rope. Each scout passed it to the next with a touch of hand to hand. A new language. No words, no sounds, only touches. Daniel stood up, opened his eyes fully. The interface glowed. The contours were sharp to the point of pain. Every detail of the space was visible as if on a blueprint. He led the squad deeper. 40 meters. 50. The ground beneath their feet had changed. Not just dead, strange, smooth, as if melted. Daniel looked closer. The surface of the soil was covered with a thin layer of something glassy, as if something red-hot had passed through here and baked the earth into a crust. 60 meters. Daniel saw it. A silhouette flashed into view. A crimson thread. The trajectory of a living creature. The interface was drawing a trail.
Something had passed through here less than 10 seconds ago. Something was moving, fast, to the right, and it stopped. Daniel froze. He looked to the right. 20 meters away from him. The creature. It stood motionless. Daniel saw it for the first time. The first person in 30 years to see the voiceless one. It was tall, a head taller than a human, slender, disproportionately slender, long limbs, 4 arms, 2 legs, a small head, elongated, no eyes, no mouth, no ears, a smooth surface like a boiled egg. The skin was pale, almost white, dull. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. The creature stood still, but the interface pulsed crimson. Danger, danger, danger. Daniel tugged the rope 3 times. The squad fell to the ground. 10 bodies pressed themselves against the dead soil. Daniel lay down last, but he didn't close his eyes. He watched. The headless one turned its head, slowly, smoothly, without a jerk. The head moved as if on a hinge. It turned away from the squad.
Daniel stopped breathing. The creature stood 20 meters away from the 10 people lying on the ground.
It didn't move. It made no sound. It didn't breathe. It just stood there and turned its head. The interface flashed a new line. Subject unknown. Sensory profile. Visual range. Reacts to movement. Does not react to sound. Does not react to heat. Daniel read the lines and felt cold sweat run down his back. Visual range. It sees. The voiceless sees. In a world where no one sees, the voiceless uses sight. 30 seconds. A minute. A minute and a half. The creature stood there. Then it turned and left, silently, without a trace. A crimson thread of its trajectory stretched northwest and faded at the 10-second mark. Daniel waited another 5 minutes. Then he tugged the rope twice. The squad got up. He wrote a single word on Yuna's palm. Back. They exited the zone in 20 minutes. When sound returned, the 8 scouts sat down on the ground and were silent for a long time.
Yuna stood next to Daniel. She said quietly that he had seen something out there. Daniel said yes. Yuna asked what. Daniel said, a creature. 1. 20 meters away. It was standing there, watching. Yuna squeezed his hand. She asked how he knew it was watching. Daniel didn't answer. Yuna didn't repeat the question. She knew. Maybe she didn't know exactly what, but she knew that this man had seen the voiceless one. He hadn't heard it. He hadn't smelled it. He hadn't sensed it with his skin. He had seen it. The return trip took 7 hours. No one spoke. When they entered the city, the evening bells rang. Yoram was waiting at the threshold. Sora stood nearby. Hannah sat inside with bandages laid out. Everyone was unharmed. Yoram hugged Daniel. Briefly, tightly. Then she let go and went into the kitchen. Daniel stood in the workshop. He now knew 3 things. The voiceless are real. They see. And they already know that someone was looking back at them. For 3 days after the expedition, Daniel didn't leave the workshop. He was thinking, the headless ones can see.
They are the only ones besides him who can see in this world. White dawn took away people's sight, but not theirs. Or perhaps it gave them sight, or maybe they brought it with them, wherever they came from. The interface showed that the headless one reacts to movement, not to sound or heat, a visual predator in a world of blind prey, the perfect hunter. And Daniel, with his sight, was the only one who could see them in return. A crack in the shield. Becco was right. Daniel was a beacon. But Becco was only half right. A sighted person did indeed attract the voiceless, but a sighted person was also the only one who could fight them. To kill the beacon was to kill their only chance. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the door. A single knock. Quiet. Steady. Yoram opened it. A man stood in the doorway. Daniel saw him from behind the workbench. Not young, in his 50s.
Short, stocky, short gray hair. His face was calm. Absolutely calm. Not a single unnecessary emotion. No tension, no anger, no fear. The face of a man who had long since made up his mind. The interface flashed. Subject, Jung Bek Ho. Arch-hearer. Condition, stable. Heart rate, 64. Maximum threat. Bek Ho entered alone. No trackers, no dogs, no security. He walked through the workshop with confidence, like a man who knows every corner. He had already been here. Not physically, he knew the layout of the room. His people had described every detail to him. Bek Ho sat down on Yuna's stool. Yerim stood against the wall. Her hand was clenching the tuning fork so tightly her fingers had turned white. Bek Ho said in a steady voice that he hadn't come for the tuner, that he'd come for the apprentice, that maybe she would leave them alone. Yerim didn't move. Bek Ho repeated himself, in the same tone, without a threat, without pressure. He simply repeated it. Yerim glanced toward Daniel.
Not with her eyes, with her head, out of habit. Daniel said quietly that everything was fine. Yoram went upstairs. Daniel heard her stop on the third step. She didn't go any further. She was listening. Becco was sitting on a stool. Daniel was standing at the workbench. There were 3 meters between them. Becco spoke. He said he knew who Daniel was. Not the name, not the story, the essence. He said that in 30 years he had found 4 like him, people who appeared out of nowhere, who moved differently, who knew things a blind man couldn't know. All 4 were masters. All 4 did amazing things for blind people, and all 4 attracted the voiceless. Daniel listened. Becco continued. The first one appeared 25 years ago. A woman, an engineer. She built a water supply system for a village in the south. 6 months after her arrival, a quiet zone appeared near the village. A year later, the village was gone. The second one appeared 20 years ago. A man, a teacher.
He opened a school for blind children. He developed a new teaching system. 8 months later, the quiet zone swallowed the school. Not a single child survived.
Becco spoke evenly, without emotion, like a man recounting facts. But Daniel saw his hands. They lay on his knees, palms down, his fingers pressed slightly into the fabric. He remembered each one, the third, the fourth. The same thing every time. A sighted one appears,
does impossible things. The quiet zone follows. People die. Beko said his eldest son was the first seer after the white dawn. The boy was 7 years old. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why he could see and others couldn't. He brought the voiceless one into the house because he was trying to show his mother something he'd seen in the garden. Something beautiful. A flower. Beko's wife and younger son died. The boy survived. Beko killed him with his own hands. A year later, when he realized the boy was a beacon, silence.
Daniel stood there, unable to move. Beko had killed his own son.
Not out of malice, not out of revenge, out of calculation. Out of the conviction that it was pointless someone's child would bring the voiceless back again, to other children, to other families. Beko raised his head. His face was still calm. He said he was giving Daniel 3 days to say goodbye, to finish his business. Then he would come and finish it. Not out of hatred, out of necessity. Beko stood up, turned toward the door. Daniel said one word. Wait. Beko stopped. Daniel said that Beko was right. That sight attracts the voiceless, but that Beko sees only half the truth. He said he had been in the quiet zone, that he had seen a voiceless, that he knows how they hunt, what they see, that the only way to protect the city is to see them in return. Beko stood with his back to him. He didn't move. Daniel continued. He said that the 4 before him had died not because they could see.
They died because they were alone, because they were killed before they could do anything, before they could understand the threat, before they could build a defense. He said he wasn't asking for mercy. He wasn't asking for time for himself. He was asking for one night to show him something. Beko was silent. Then he turned his head. Not his whole body, just his head. He asked what exactly. Daniel said he'd show him tomorrow. Here, in the workshop. Beko was silent for a moment. Then he said he would come, with people. That if it was a trap, the workshop would cease to exist, and everyone in it. Daniel said it wasn't a trap. Beko left. Yoram ran down the stairs. She was shaking. Daniel took her hands. They were ice cold. She asked what he had said. Daniel replied that he had asked for one night. Yoram asked why. Daniel said he had been working on the device for 6 months, that it wasn't ready, but that he had one night. Yoram squeezed his hands. She asked what kind of device it was. Daniel said it was an acoustic panorama, a device that translates what he sees into what a blind person can feel. Vibrations, textures, air pressure. A map of reality for those who cannot see. He had been working on it for 5 months. He started after the Seeker's first visit. He knew this moment would come. Yoram let go of his hands. She said she would gather everyone. Daniel worked all night. Emily brought the materials. Yuna brought resonators from the guild barracks. Sunhwa brought tuning forks from the Great Hall. Hannah brought the thinnest surgical membranes from the clinic. Yoram worked nearby. She adjusted the plates. She fine-tuned the frequencies. She didn't ask why. She just worked. Sora sat in the corner and didn't sleep. She passed the tools. She found them without fail.
The antenna ring on her finger helped her navigate the cluttered table. By dawn, the device was ready. Rough, unfinished, but functional. A wooden frame.
12 membranes. 12 resonators. A system of lenses made from polished rock crystal that Daniel had been secretly assembling for 5 months. The lenses gathered light. The membranes converted it into vibrations of different frequencies. Each frequency corresponded to an object at a specific distance and in a specific direction. A blind person standing before the panorama could sense the world around them, not hear it, sense it, with their skin, their bones, their whole body. Bacco arrived in the evening with 12 people, just as he'd said. They filled the workshop. Daniel stood next to the device, Yoram stood by the wall, Una stood by the door, Emily by the back door, Sanhua in the center of the room, Hannah next to Sora on the stairs. Everyone was there. Daniel told Bacco he wanted to show him something, asked him to come closer. Bacco approached, stood in front of the panorama. Daniel turned on the device. The membranes quivered. The air filled with inaudible vibrations. They touched Bacco's skin, faces, hands, necks. Every touch was information.
Bacco stood there. Daniel saw his face. Nothing for the first second, nothing for the second. On the third, Bacco flinched. His eyebrows rose. His lips parted slightly. He felt the workshop, the walls, the ceiling, the people. He sensed Yoram by the wall, Yoon by the door, Sora on the stairs. He sensed them not as sounds or smells, as presences, as forms, as what they are in space. Bacco stood and sensed a world he hadn't seen in 30 years. Daniel spoke softly. He said there was a wall right in front of Bacco, that there was a door to the right, that a 10-year-old girl was sitting on the stairs, clutching a book of fairy tales to her chest, that the girl had a wooden ring with a tongue on her finger, that snow was falling outside the window, that lights were burning in the harbor, that far to the south stood a faceless creature, gazing toward the city. Bacco stood there.
For a very long time. The vibrations touched his skin.
The world existed around him, complete, real, alive. Then Bacco asked, without turning his head, if Daniel did this for everyone. Daniel replied that he did it for one person at a time, and that today it was for him. Bacco was silent. A minute, 2. The workshop held its breath. Then Bacco turned to his men. He said in an even voice that they were leaving, that he had come to the wrong house. 12 men in black bandanas filed out of the workshop one by one. Bacco was the last to leave. He stopped at the threshold. Without turning around, he said that Daniel was the 5th, that the 4 before him were masters, but none had thought to make something for the one who came to kill him, that perhaps that was why they hadn't survived, and he would survive. Bacco left. His footsteps faded into the alley. The workshop was silent. Yoram, Una, Sanhua, Hannah, Emily, Sora. Everyone stood there listening to the silence.
Then Sora walked over to Daniel. She took his hand. She said he was trembling. Daniel laughed.', very quietly, and he began to cry.
for the first time in a year, because he understood. He hadn't been killed not because he was strong, not because he had sight, but because he had finally done something for the most terrifying person in his life. And it had worked. Yoram approached. She stood beside him. She put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. Sora didn't let go of his hand. Una stood by the door and smiled. Her first real smile. Emily sat on the workbench and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Sanhua stood in the middle of the room and said nothing. But Daniel could see her face. It was filled with gratitude. Not toward him, toward the world, for the fact that she was in this room. Hannah sat on the stairs and cried quietly, not out of grief, because, for the first time in many years, she believed that everything would be all right. Daniel stood in his workshop,
in the house that had become his home, among people who had become his family, in a world without sight, in a world where he was the only one who could see. And he understood now. He hadn't been brought here by chance. The 4 before him had died because they tried to restore sight to a world that had rejected him. Daniel wouldn't restore sight. He would design a world where sight wasn't needed. A world where Sora could do anything she wanted. A world where Yoram would hear the sunset. A world where Una would go to the quiet zone and return. A world where the voiceless could be seen without eyes. He didn't know everything yet. He didn't know that White Dawn was an experiment. He didn't know who was behind the transfers. He didn't know why something was persistently sending sighted masters into a blind world. But he knew one thing. He is here. He sees. And he will do what he knows how to do. One thing for one person, as long as life lasts.